video is made possible thanks to my patrons and the sponsor of today's video, Rocket Money. I love reading. I've read a lot of books. I own a lot of books. I love supporting my local library. I love to read. Why is that giving? I love to tour. But every once in a while, I read a book that fills me with what I can only describe as, I don't know, like a pure and visceral rage. It's rare, but it happens. But I was thinking about all of the books that I genuinely wish I'd never read, and almost all of them had something in common. They're all popular on Booktok. Now, does this mean that Booktok has bad taste? Absolutely not. I've read many books that are considered Booktok books that I absolutely love and adore. But there are 5 books that I've read that I have seen praised to the high heavens that I think are absolutely horrendous. Not only that, I actually think they're quite damaging and problematic. These books span across genres and demographics and subject matter. One is even a nonfiction book, and there's not a lot of art in general that I can say I hate, but I hate these books. But this isn't just going to be a rant video. Of course, we're putting our critical thinking skills to good use, whipping out that English and film degree knowledge to break down why I think these are the worst books on TikTok. We're going to analyze the quality of writing, the subject matter, the messaging, the authors, and I'm also going to suggest why I think they're so popular, and let me help you. Let me save you from wasting your time and money on these god-awful books. Another thing that can help you save your, I presume, hard-earned money, maybe inherited money, I don't judge, is today's sponsor, Rocket Money. I've mentioned this many a time, but I have ADHD that makes me very forgetful, and I cannot tell you the amount of times I've signed up for a subscription service, maybe for a free trial, and I immediately forget about it. The moment that tab is closed, it is out of my brain. Until maybe a few months down the line, and I see what has been taking money out of my bank account for all these months. Oh, that thing that I signed up to that one time. Well, Rocket Money is an all-in-one personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, manage your budget, and grow your savings. It is the Swiss Army knife of finance apps. Freedom from unwanted subscriptions is just a few taps away, as Rocket Money can identify all of these subscriptions coming out of your bank account, and it lets you cancel any that you don't want directly in the app. You don't have to send an email, you don't have to pick up the phone. Glorious. Rocket Money can create customized budgets to give you an overview of where you're spending your money and help you see maybe where you're spending a little bit too much. When using all of the app's premium features, Rocket Money has helped save its users up to $740 a year and over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. Take control of your finances today and go to rocketmoney.com/L to get started for free. Thank you, Rocket Money. As I mentioned, the books I'm going to talk about range across genre, but they surprisingly have some common through lines. So I've done my best to weave them together. I don't know what this is, to weave them together in the most logical order. And I want to give a content warning right off the bat, because 2 of these books deal very heavily with suicide and depression. One of those books is A Little Life, which deals with every possible trauma and trigger under the sun, including SA, including child SA, including self-harm. 2 other books have what I consider to be problematic depictions of consent. So I'll flag when I'm talking about them, when these things come up. So just take care of yourself. Also, I'm going to do a video on the Booktok books that I do like, because contrary to popular belief, I'm not a hater of everything. There are a lot of things that I really do enjoy. So I'm going to do a video on Booktok books that I do like over on Patreon. You can pop over there if you're interested. If you want to help out any other way, you can like, comment, subscribe, but no pressure. If you're just here to hang out, that's okay too. We're starting off strong with A Court of Thorns and Roses, or acotar as the locals call it, by Sarah J. Maas. This is the golden child of Booktok. It is impossible to exist on book social media, or maybe just normal social media, I don't know, without some exposure to acotar. I initially tried reading this a few years ago because I read some Throne of Glass books when I was a teenager, which are also by Sarah J. Maas, and 14 or like 15-year-old me really enjoyed them. However, I could not get through this book as an adult at the ripe old age of 27. Yes, guys, I'm 27. I know it's hard to believe from my youthful, exuberant, bubbly energy, but I am 27 years old. It was only a couple months ago that I actually read the whole book for a podcast that I'm doing with my friend Ellie, who works in publishing. It's called Why You're Reading. We follow a similar format to this. We take trending social media books and break them down. I do cultural context. She gives some like insider publishing and marketing info. But the episodes are like half an hour long, and we do try to keep them civil. So I wanted to take this space to go full hater on this book. Bill Hader, to go Bill Hader on this book. A Court of Thorns and Roses is a retelling of The Beauty and the Beast for the girl boss generation. The protagonist, Farah, is the quintessential, like, strong female protagonist that we saw pop up everywhere in the 2010s. I think that she is a poor imitation of Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games. And this book is set in a fantasy universe. Allegedly. But more on that in a little. And in this universe, there are fairies who are magical monsters, and they live separate to humans, who are kind of like second-class citizens in a way. And one day, Farah, while hunting for food, kills a fairy that had shapeshifted into a wolf and had crossed the dividing wall. And so as penance, she has to live out the rest of her days in a beautiful castle in the fairy realm with the equally beautiful fairy High Lord Tamlin. And as you can imagine, over the course of the novel, the two fall in love. I thought this book was so poorly written. I actually dreaded sitting down to read it, and the only reason I finished it was because we were doing a podcast on it. The plot was full of tropes. It was painfully predictable. And listen, I don't mind a trope. I don't mind predictability, especially in like a romance novel where I know exactly what I want from this book and I know I'm going to get it. But this plot was so slow and repetitive, and I just hated all of the characters. Like, I found them all insufferable. There were so many instances where it was clear that Sarah J. Maas was trying to make them like charming, and I thought they were grotesque. We're told the protagonist, Farah, is a strong female character. But she's so inconsistent. She goes from like anxious and terrified one minute to then making these like witty quips and smirking in the next. And I say witty because they were just cringe. And like, I can't even think of a more sophisticated or analytical word for it. It was just cringe. This is also the book that is notorious for repeated mentions of like watery bowels, and like saying like my bowels went watery. If you've heard that, if not, well, that happens in this book. And before anyone defends this book against my critiques and says, you know, it gets better, the second book is way better, blah, 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 I, no offense, don't want to hear it. I'm going to tell you all now that I'm not going to read any of these other books. Ever. Unless I'm forced to, against my will. Acotar is a staple of the romantasy genre, which is a term for romance novels in a fantasy setting, as you may have guessed. And they most often include fae, but they can include vampires, dragons, demons, what have you. You know, if you can dream it, you can read it. It is extraordinarily popular on and offline, and Sarah J. Maas is like the best-selling queen of the genre. In this day's article, Eli Cugini defines the romantasy genre as the stock formula is that a woman, essential to insert fantasy kingdom problem here, is being guarded, imprisoned, or targeted by a man she hates, and that this hate blossoms into sexual tension. Enemies to lovers, as Booktok would call it. More typical romances tend to value lightness, escapism, and pleasurable predictability. Romantasy values danger, twists, and immersion, and uses violence, or the threat of it, to build sexual tension. And this sexual tension in acotar, in my opinion, is the opposite of sexy. It often crosses the boundaries of consent, and I was actually quite surprised to find this because acotar and its successors are commonly labeled fairy porn, and one thing that I'd heard kind of time and time again about the contemporary romantasy genre was how it privileges female pleasure, that seems to be one of the main draws for readers as well.
I will be a romantasy girly until the day I die. Because if I'm going to read about a man for 600 pages, he better be comparing me to the sky and the stars.
And I'm all for that. Fantasy is a genre that has historically been very male-dominated, both in terms of its authors and characters. And female characters are very often like underdeveloped and or mistreated. If you think about like the sexual politics in Game of Thrones, the amount of assault that goes on there, for example. But despite conversations about female pleasure in acotar, I found it quite disturbing. The dodgy sexual dynamics are established right off the bat. Before Farah goes to the fairy kingdom, she said that she would sleep with this guy in their town, and Mass writes, "Those times were hungry and empty and sometimes cruel, but never lovely." Sometimes cruel? Okay, I'm not quite sure what that means, but we'll move on. Then, with Farah and Tamlin, her love interest, the beast, the hairy High Lord, the fairy High Lord. If we put aside the kind of basic dynamics of the power imbalance of captive and captor, the age gap between the 500 and the 19-year-old, if we're to move beyond all that, just first of all, the actual sexual encounters are quite gross. There's another scene where Tamlin is like high off of this fairy sex festival, and he like kisses and then bites Farah kind of to punish her, and then the next day he says that he can't be held accountable for his actions. And this to me kind of gives like, I was drunk. I was drunk. It's not my fault what happened or what I did. Like, I was drunk. I was inebriated. It was kind of that vibe, and I was kind of quite disturbed by it. Later in the book, Farah is held captive, and she is consistently drugged by a man and like paraded around. She like dances for him and undresses at parties and flirts with this man, and at the end of it all, he says that he like drugged her for her own good so that she wouldn't remember. I don't really know if roofing someone can ever be viewed as being for their own good, but okay, he doesn't SA her, to be clear, but he says that he would have liked to. He said, "I would have liked nothing more than to enjoy you." And then this character becomes the love interest in the next book. Like, we're supposed to be charmed by his restraint. Anyway, and also when Tamlin gets emotional, when he's like angsty or aroused or angry, the three primary emotions, he has like these claws that start poking out, which I don't find sexy at all. And I also feel like it kind of plays into that like violence, danger aspect of it, but that's just a tiny little detail. A huge bone that I have to pick with this series, that I've personal beef with Sarah J. Maas over. Okay, I'm getting heated. Okay. A beef that I have with Sarah J. Maas that I will never be able to overcome is its treatment of Irish and Celtic culture. Remember when I said earlier that this was allegedly a fantasy universe? I want you to look at the map of this realm. So Prythian is where the action takes place in the novel, and then we have Highburn. Look familiar? Ring any bells? That is a map of Britain and Ireland. That is Britain and Ireland. First of all, the laziness of an author to just copy and paste real islands for their fantasy world grinds my gears. Also, I'm like, if you want to draw a country, it's not that hard. Anyways, it gets worse. Prythian is a beautiful land where all of the beautiful fairies live, full of nature and castles, and it's not without its danger, mind you. And then Highburn is a desolate land, and its people are brutes. They're drunken, ugly, power-hungry, poor, and they are desperate to invade and take over Prythian. And Highburn is a play on Hibernia, which is the Latin name for Ireland. I'm also pretty sure she refers to Highburn as like an Emerald Isle at one point. And the Highburn Fae embody all of the anti-Irish stereotypes that were used by Britain to dehumanize Irish people in real life. And you might think maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe blah, blah, blah. Let's look at the map again. Yeah. And then literally the stereotypes are one for one what British propaganda used to purport about Irish people. But in the book, Sarah J. Maas is reversing the very real colonial dynamics and saying that all those stereotypes are like actual characteristics. I posted a TikTok and a reel about this on our podcast account, both of which got quite a few views. And I got a lot of like, it's fantasy, it's not that deep, get over it kind of comments. Fantasy, sci-fi, any genre fiction is not exempt from political discussion or analysis. In fact, real life politics, history, geography often inform how we read fantasy texts. They often inform the texts themselves. If you look at Dune or Game of Thrones and like the racialized power dynamics at play there. And I think when an author uses a map of the UK and Ireland and calls the Irish island Highburn, she's not only being incredibly lazy, but she's also opening up herself to criticism. In general, Sarah J. Maas takes a lot from Celtic mythology and culture. There's a festival in the novel, which in real life is an actual Welsh summer festival, and then in the book, it's just like a fairy sex festival. This is not new. Celtic culture, mythology, and languages have been used to make fantasy worlds seem exotic, but often there is little to no actual engagement with the culture. Fourth Wing author Rebecca Yarros had to apologize after mispronouncing Scots Gaelic names in her book.
And that's a more Gaelic spelling, or more pronunciation. So it can be right. I say Biscayeth.
Rebecca, I truly cannot believe that you wrote a book with Gaelic words in it and you were on an interview calling them Gaelic. Gaelic is a different language. You did not use Gaelic in your book. You used Gaelic, babes. She goes on to wildly mispronounce all of the Gaelic words that she used. She calls Violet's dragon Tairnanach. I have no idea who that is. When I read the book, I read Tarnanach, which means thunder. The worst one is when she calls Mira's dragon Tyne. I don't know who that is. That word is Chenya, and it means fire in Gaelic. I know people are going to say, but she wrote the books, but this is the way she wants to pronounce them. That is not how minority languages work. Minority languages, particularly Celtic languages, deserve respect, especially from Americans, fantasy American authors who co-opt them to add a little bit of spice and magic to their fantasy books because they can't come up with their own names for things.
This is a touchy subject for me as an Irish person, obviously, because it is my culture. And I've thought a lot about this kind of appropriation of Celtic, Irish mythology, aesthetics, language, etc. And I wonder if this kind of like soft cultural colonization happens because if white authors stole from other cultures like Latin American or African or Asian cultures, which, don't get me wrong, as they have done and continue to do, but like I wonder with that there's more of a risk of being cancelled. So nowadays it might just be less risky or more acceptable to like steal from white cultures that are not your own. I don't know, that's just a theory. But like Ireland was colonized for 800 years. Our native language is at risk of dying out, and if you're going to take elements of our culture or of Celtic culture instead of making the effort to do proper world building of your own, at least pay it the respect that it deserves, and like don't just like take a name and like a shell of an idea and just fill it with your own sludge. And it's so clear in acotar and Fourth Wing that this does not spring from an author's genuine interest in the mythology or languages, but is instead just a shortcut to exoticize their fantasy realm. I don't think there's anything wrong with writing outside your culture, but I think the issue is when you're not paying any respect to that culture. I'm popping back in because I want to make my point a bit clearer here. Anti-Irish sentiments, stereotypes, stealing from Irish culture doesn't have nearly the same detrimental impact to us as it would to other communities, particularly, like communities of color. Ireland nowadays is a wealthy nation. We benefit from white privilege. It's not a level playing field at all. I just point it out because I'm Irish and it pisses me off when I see it. But also after, 800 years of colonization and oppression, obviously the remnants of that is still going to linger in culture and politics and etc. I think it's still worth pointing out, if you see something, say something. And I read an account of Sarah J. Maas from 2016 where she praises Israel and she talks about her birthright trip. She talks about her grandmother serving in the Israeli army. From that article, a lot of people say that she is a Zionist. I couldn't find any more recent info, but even that speaks a lot for itself in the fact that she's not condemning the genocide that's currently happening. And if it is the case that she's a Zionist, then it doesn't surprise me that she would create this fantasy land where Ireland, the historically oppressed, is actually trying to be a colonial oppressor to Britain.
Oh, that's no.
In the sense that that checks out to me. I also discovered that at one point she used the murder of Breonna Taylor, a black woman who was murdered by police, to promote her book. I didn't think it could get any worse. She posted a cover reveal for A Court of Silver Flames and said in the caption, "I hope it's a bit of light for you guys today, given the appalling lack of justice for Breonna Taylor." And from reading what other people have said about her books, it seems like she often falls into harmful racialized stereotypes in regards to the POC coded characters in her books, often using their suffering to further the development of white characters. So with all of that, why do I think people are reading these books? I think the wider turn to the fantasy genre and the popularity of it is from people who grew up reading Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, and Twilight, who lived through the kind of 2010s romantasy waves of Vampire Diaries and Twilight and all of its spin-offs. All of those people are now adults and maybe looking to find fantasy again, and fantasy that is not male-dominated. Some other factors that I think play a part are that there's a huge community online, so people can discuss theories, their fan favorites, and who they ship. With a rise of e-readers, people can read whatever they want in public without fear of judgment, and the acotar series covers aren't super obviously fantasy either. And finally, I think throughout COVID, there's been a strong desire for escapism, for worlds that are completely unlike our own, and that really saw a rise in genre fiction, fantasy or romantasy being one of them. And I have no doubt that despite my best efforts to raise awareness against the Sarah J. Maas cause, she will continue to thrive. We are now taking a sharp pivot away from genre fiction to the non-fiction self-help book Atomic Habits by James Clear. When I posted that I was going to talk about this on my community tab, some people were surprised that it was a bad book, and I too was surprised because I have seen this book all over my feed for years, in productivity videos, in TikToks. Everyone seemed to be reading this book, and it became like the productivity Bible of the internet. And when I finally read it a couple months ago, again for the podcast, I was well, there's a reason that it is in this video. The book's thesis is that our lives are the sum of our habits, and that by making changes to that kind of granular level of our habits, we can then transform our entire lives. Clear proposes 4 laws for creating good habits and breaking bad ones, and he goes through each law with loads, I would say too many, anecdotes and examples. This book is so incredibly repetitive and waffly. It is full of pointless diagrams, and Clear will cite an animal study in a chapter and then will try to kind of bring it back to a point about human habits, but it doesn't actually improve your understanding of anything, and it just ends up being really confusing. And there's also a summary at the end of every single chapter, even if that chapter is 5 pages long. That's not an exaggeration. This book could have been a BuzzFeed listicle, a 500-word article at most. I tried to go into this book with an open mind because I am not a self-help girly in general. I do think a lot of self-help consists of the same empowerment message or the same few nuggets of advice repackaged and sold back to you in order to get these few grifters money, but that's an issue with the genre. That's not just this book. If Books Could Kill is a great podcast, kind of all about these grifter books. They actually did an episode on Atomic Habits, but I understand that self-help and self-improvement books can be helpful to some, but as someone with ADHD and autism, I find that the conventional tips of make a routine or do a little bit of tidying every day or just try doing this one little thing, it does not work for me. And that's okay. That it does not work for my brain. I'm not here to like tear down that aspect of the book because I understand that that might just not be for me. But why should we listen to Mr. James Clear and his advice? He is not an expert. He's not a psychologist, not a neurologist, actually nothing of any sort, really. He has a blog and a newsletter. But he's branded himself an expert on habits and decision making. Okay. At the beginning of the novel, he tells us a little bit about himself. And he says that he has always been organized, regimented, and self-disciplined. Habits have never been a problem for Mr. Clear. Okay, well, why would we listen to you? The lack of his struggle with like self-discipline, routine, etc. really comes through in his advice, because if you have never struggled to wake up early or go to the gym or what have you, you're not going to understand why those things are difficult, so you're not going to have good advice. And that's exactly what happens, because James Clear's advice ends up being very like, just do it. Or it's just very like common sense. And this extends to much larger issues as well. In a lot of productivity media, whether it's like books, videos, TED Talks, whatever, the advice tends to exist in a vacuum that ignores class, health, gender, disability, systemic issues. It's very easy to tell someone that they need to like go for a walk every day or go to the gym for 5 minutes a day, which is what James Clear says in his book. But that's a lot harder if you are a working parent, if you live in an unsafe area, if you are depressed, if you're not able to walk for long periods of time or at all, if you're not able to afford a gym membership. But because this advice is so simplistic and like common sense, it can make you feel like your inability to reach this kind of baseline standard is a personal flaw. And Clear also has this weird tendency to inflate everything to a habit. And this includes everything from making your bed to smoking to doing heroin. He reduces addictions to habits. And he tries to say that everything in our lives is about habits. It seems to me like he's reducing everything to a habit in order to fit his thesis and to like justify the book's existence. It would be okay if James Clear is not an expert himself on habit making, despite the fact that he did brand himself as one, but maybe he did the research. Maybe he did the work. Do you think he did the research? Do you think he did the work? The research that this book depends on, I like actually struggle to call it research, because you might be fooled when reading it by the references and the footnotes. But then if you actually look at those references, you will see there's a strange amount of Twitter, Reddit, and Wikipedia links. This man literally went against like everything that we're taught in school as teenagers about academic referencing. And like sometimes he uses references, like sometimes he'll reference a tweet for something that doesn't even need referencing. But the worst are the Reddit anecdotes, where he like obviously just went through Reddit threads and plucked out anecdotes and put them in his book as if that these were like hard facts. But he takes one Reddit anecdote and frames it as if it is like his own. He says, "I once heard a story about a man in a wheelchair. When asked if it was difficult being confined, he responded, 'I'm not confined to my wheelchair. I'm liberated by it. If it wasn't for my wheelchair, I would be bedbound and never leave the house.' This shift in perspective completely transformed how we lived each day." So that is actually not a story that he heard once. It is a response to the Reddit thread, "What is something that someone said that forever changed your way of thinking?" This book has sold 20 million copies, just by the way. When I see people recommend or promote this book, I wonder how much they remember or if they've actually read it, because once you remove maybe like the 2 useful anecdotes or tips that you got from this novel, it is a bad book. It is bad. It is problematic, poorly written, and it's bad. And I think that we see it so often on social media because the like basic framework of habit formation is easily kind of summarized and regurgitated to audiences. And there are some tips in there that people might find useful. But I think if you've ever watched a video about this book, you have all the information you need. Do not waste your time and do not waste your money. What if bad self-help were fiction? That is the question I imagine Matt Haig asked when he decided to write The Midnight Library. This is another book, and this is actually a library copy, hence why it's covered in plastic, because I don't own this book. But it is another book that I tried reading years ago, but it filled me with such visceral rage and frustration that I stopped less than halfway through. And I knew that I wanted to include it in this video, but I felt like I had to do my due diligence and actually read it if I were going to tear it to shreds. So 4 years after I initially abandoned it, I picked it up and read it from the start to the end. And you know what? It's actually not that bad. Just kidding, it's terrible. Content warning for suicide and depression in this novel. This book is about a 34-year-old woman named Nora from Bedford, England. After one particularly bad day, she looks around at her life and she decides this is not worth living. So she tries to kill herself. She wakes up in this library with her school librarian as this kind of guru guide figure. Mrs. Elm tells her that every book in this infinite library is an alternate reality where her life is different. So she can try out different lives, she can undo her regrets, and she can try to find a life worth living. And that's exactly what she does. In one life, she's a rock star. In another, she's an Olympic swimmer. In one, she's a glaciologist in the Arctic. And in each trial run, in each free trial of these lives, she lives out her fantasies, only to discover that not everything is perfect and that she's never 100% satisfied with her life. And then by the end of the novel, spoiler alert, I mean, you could probably see where I was going to go, she realizes that she does want to live again. Life is worth living. The first time I tried reading it, I think I gave up when I saw that it was chapter after chapter of Nora just trying on different lives, and it had the same repetitive formula of her asking like, what if this were different? And then she's like, oh, things are different. Oh, there are still bad things in my life. And after like the third or fourth time reading that, I was like, I get the point. I do not feel the need to carry on. But this time I did, and the chapters got no less repetitive. I was kind of expecting maybe there'll be a change in the formula. Maybe there'll be a twist. But it ended up super tropey and just cliche after cliche. And in a lot of the alternate realities, the drawbacks are really dramatic. Like, yeah, you're an Olympic swimmer, but your mom's dead. Or like, yeah, you're a rock star, but your brother's dead. It's just, if there's infinite books in this library, can she not pick one where she's an Olympic swimmer and her parents are alive? Then Matt Haig, like, kind of, I guess, world builds. And he throws in some weird lore about the library and quantum physics and alternate realities. And it brought up all these questions that are never properly answered and actually kind of took away from my enjoyment of the book. I feel like the attempts at world building only muddied the waters. As a protagonist, I did not like Nora. I don't mind an unlikable protagonist as long as they're interesting. I can excuse unlikability, but I draw the line at boring. Nora is so bland. Her sense of regret and, you know, what could have been is something that does resonate, but then her character development and like life lessons were about as subtle as like a hammer to the head. And the exposition is so clunky as well because main Nora doesn't have any memories of these other lives, so she goes in and tries to kind of like piece the context together. So it ends up with a lot of characters saying things like, you know, you remember your brother, you know, the one that you haven't spoken to for 2 years since that fight that you had in London about that song and that thing that you did and then he did and then you went off really upset 3 weeks later to us. And it's like, a lot of stuff like that. And a lot of the novel felt like there were just things happening to Nora, but it didn't feel like she had any agency or was like actively learning anything. All of the life lessons were spelt out by the like librarian. Beyond the like structure and the characters and everything, it was just not written well. Haig uses so many similes and they're pointless and weird and distracting. For example, the librarian's smile curled at its edges like a fallen leaf. Cars sliding by like forgotten lives. Alright. Dust fell in thin wisps from the ceiling, from cracks fissuring and spreading like spider webs woven at unnatural speed. At one point, he describes a fragment of ceiling as roughly the shape of France. I don't think these descriptions add anything. There's also an entire chapter in the middle called The Many Lives of Nora Seed that is literally, in one life, she only ate toast. In one life, she was a travel blogger. In one life, a cat sitter. In one life, a volunteer in a homeless shelter. And it goes on and on and on like that for an entire chapter. I was really put off by the ending of the novel because the life that makes Nora decide, life is worth living is one where she has a husband and a child. So this woman's life is now complete with a husband and a child. Okay, gender roles, sure. I feel like that's such a trope that we always see in real life and in media of like a woman is incomplete unless she has a child. I was surprised to see that Matt Haig previously wrote a memoir/self-help book called Reasons to Stay Alive, where he discussed his own experiences with anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation, because the depiction of mental health in this novel is so simplistic and half-baked. I feel like it's like a novel for children, but it's not. But despite my qualms, The Midnight Library was a bestseller, and it was voted the favorite fiction of 2020 on Goodreads. And I think it became so popular because it's a very inoffensive take on mental health, and it's a like feel good, life is worth living message. So love the message. Not gone on the delivery. And another argument for the book is that maybe it inspires other people out there who are struggling with their mental health, or it opens up conversations about it, which is great. If it helped people, that's great. Cool. It also came out in 2020, famously the year of Miss Coronavirus. And so I think that desire for like a simple comfort was at an all-time high. I don't think it's the worst book in the world. I think it could have been 100 pages shorter, but its treatment of mental health is nothing compared to the next book. If The Midnight Library is like, haha, don't kill yourself, A Little Life is, haha, kill yourself, It literally is. A Little Life came out in 2015, and don't let the blurb fool you, because she says on the back, A Little Life follows 4 college classmates as they move to New York in search of fame and fortune. Lies. Absolute lies. It is about one man, Jude St. Francis, and all of the trauma and abuse that he has endured, the depression, self-loathing, self-harming, and suicidal ideation that comes from it. So with that, you can imagine that we're going to be covering some very dark themes here, content warning, and it pervades throughout the entire section. So I read this book right when COVID broke out. And though it did have its Booktok boom, tick tick boom, I actually heard about it from friends. I read this book sitting in the sunshine being like, things are going to go back to normal after a couple weeks. Past me was in for a couple surprises on that one. There's a reason why A Little Life is often posted on TikTok with people sobbing over it. It is the most depressing book I have ever had the displeasure of reading. And if you like this book, or if you want to argue against my points, I ask that you please hear everything that I have to say about it before commenting. That's all I ask. As I said, this novel starts off around 4 college friends and roommates in New York City, but 2 of the characters very quickly fade into the background as it becomes clear that this novel is about one man, Jude St. Francis. Hanya Yanagihara's intention with this novel was to test the amount of suffering that one person could endure. It is an argument for mental health-based euthanasia, and it argues that some people are too broken to fix. Some people are beyond the capacity for happiness. That person being Jude. I am not going to go into everything that Jude goes through in this book because I don't think that it's necessary, honestly. But as early as 70 pages in, he has to go to the doctor because he has harmed himself so much that he's losing a lot of blood. And it only gets worse from there. Much of Jude's trauma is drip fed to us in flashbacks, and it really kicks off in earnest kind of a couple hundred pages in to this 700-page novel. So at that point, you've already sunk some hours into it, and I think the kind of drip feeding makes it easier, not easy, but easier to read, because if you lay out all of the trauma chronologically that Jude goes through, it becomes clear that this is just the epitome of a trauma plot. Jude is SA'd, abused, and tortured from when he is a child by several different people at several different stages of his life, and he is depressed, suicidal, and self-harms throughout his entire adulthood. And I don't want to say that the abuse in this novel is unrealistic, because there are factors like cycles of abuse, disenfranchisement, poverty, sexuality. All of these things can put people at risk of repeated abuse. However, the extent and amount of trauma is unnecessary, it's over the top, and it is gratuitous. All of the abuse, the self-harm, everything is described in graphic detail. And that was from my memory. I went back and checked and read some excerpts and confirmed graphic detail. Even just like reading a few extracts made me feel sick. And there's a difference between showing trauma and traumatic things and actually exploring it. Showing these things happening is not the same as telling a meaningful story. It's not the same as actually exploring these issues, which I did not think Yanagihara did sufficiently at all. To like compare it, if you think about, say, the use of SA scenes in film and TV, I think most of the time they are completely unnecessary. They are less about exploring trauma than they are just about showing it, whether it be to like shock the viewer or what have you. I think that's kind of a very similar situation here with the trauma that's shown. Something to note about this novel, which I was shocked to discover, is that Hanya Yanagihara did no research for this novel. A fact that she has repeated several times in several interviews, and it's also something that I'm going to circle back to. So she wrote a novel rife with abuse and trauma and depression, and did no research on SA, on child SA, on trauma or its impacts. And not only do I think that that is bad writing, I also think that it is irresponsible. Speaking of bad writing, I don't think that this book is written well, particularly in regard to the characters. There is like a real dichotomy of good and bad characters, where the bad characters, of which there are many, are like cartoonishly evil villains, like the depths of evil, just horrible people. And then the good characters are like wholly preoccupied with Jude's well-being, and they would drop everything and do anything for him. And despite all of his trauma, Jude is the perfect victim. He is exceptional. He grew up in the foster system, but he got a full scholarship to a prestigious university. He has a law degree and a master's in maths from MIT. He's a talented musician, an expert baker, and he is a highly accomplished lawyer. I'm not saying that this is beyond the realm of possibility, but it's certainly unrealistic, and I think it ignores how the majority of people who grew up in these contexts, who went through these traumas, would actually live. I think it glosses over issues of class disparity and systemic disenfranchisement. The novel takes place in this kind of like unspecified time period as well, and I think that disconnection in the time period reflects how Yanagihara failed to situate Jude's issues in like a social or cultural context at all. And like this may have happened to him, this individual, but like there are so many power dynamics and factors at play that are not examined at all. And speaking of characters, there is maybe one female character who's interesting and actually has an impact on the plot. From researching Yanagihara, it seems like this is true of all of her novels. When asked about writing outside of her own experience in response to like hashtag own voices, Yanagihara said, "I can write whatever I want," which is fair enough. I understand the resistance to being boxed in. I don't think that you only have to write about your experience as long as you are respecting the experiences that are foreign to you. But then why, if Yanagihara can write about anything she wants, does she keep writing about gay men? And much has been made of Hanya Yanagihara's weird preoccupation with gay male characters in stories of profound and extended suffering, ones that often include child SA. Her first novel, The People in the Trees, was the story of a Nobel Prize winning scientist who was jailed for SAing children he adopted while researching on Pacific Islands. To Paradise, her latest novel, was published in 2022 and imagines an alternate reality where same-sex marriage was legalized in 1893 in New York, and it revolves around gay characters in 3 different timelines, one of which is during the AIDS crisis. I am by no means the first person to notice this pattern throughout her books. Andrea Long Chu and Daniel Mendelsohn both wrote fantastic critiques of her treatment of gay men across her work. What baffled me about Yanagihara was that when asked why she keeps writing about gay men, she said, "I don't know. I don't think there's anything inherent to the gay male identity that interests me." So is there no motivation behind it? There's no meaning? This is not like a lens to look at a particular issue? Okay, sure. She also said, "I'm not that interested in abuse really, but what I am interested in as a writer is the long-term effect it has, particularly in men." And yet she did no research on that long-term effect. Okay, my ultimate issue with this novel is the message that Jude is too broken to fix, that there is no hope for him, and that he should be allowed to take his own life. Don't get me wrong, I think that an exploration of mental health-based euthanasia could be really interesting and nuanced, but this is not an interesting or nuanced perspective. Yanagihara's lack of research results in a book that spreads incredibly dangerous messages about mental health, especially about therapy and medication. She has stated that she does not believe in or trust talk therapy, and she thinks that if you feel like there is no hope for you to have a good life, you should be allowed to take your own life. And as Constance Grady points out for Vox, a characteristic of depression is to convince the depressed person that they have grasped a deep truth about the universe, that pleasure has gone from the world and will never return, that nothing will ever change or get better, and that anyone who thinks otherwise is deluded. The oddity of Yanagihara's stance is that it treats this common and well-understood symptom of depression, which is treatable, as though it were fatal. To make things a little personal for a second, as someone who has gone through a significant portion of childhood trauma, not SA, but other things that I am not going to talk about now, there is this sense when you grow up with so much sustained trauma that you might be broken, that there is something fundamentally wrong or unlovable in you. That is not true, but that took me years of healing, of therapy, of antidepressants, of talking with friends and family to realize and to actually believe about myself, to get to a point where I didn't feel like I was broken and I didn't feel like I was destined to carry like the weight of this trauma for the rest of my life. But if I read this book when I was younger and like really in the pits of it, I know that it only would have enforced the belief that life was not worth living and that I was the person who was not cut out for it. And why would you want that to be the message of your book? I understand art is meant for different things. It is meant to push boundaries. It is meant to explore different emotions and opinions. But I don't know why you'd want to spread that message. And I think it's definitely true that when people read this book, they may see parts of themselves in Jude, you know, what he's been through, how he copes, or, you know, how he doesn't cope. And again, that's the power of art. Like, I don't want to take that away from anyone. Jeff Chu wrote in an article for Vox that this book gave him the vocabulary to describe his own assault. I read A Little Life when I wasn't ready to talk about trauma or even to hear about it. But Jude's inability to address his wounds compelled me to begin to address mine. His struggle to find his peace emboldened me to try to find mine. And I think that is amazing. And I'm very happy for John Chu. But in that same article, Chu then goes on to call a negative review empathy deficient, and he accuses the book's critics of being devoid of empathy and dismissive of trauma. I think that you can acknowledge the personal impact that something had on you and realize that your experience with a piece of art is just that. It is personal, it is individual, just like my experience with this book is personal, it's individual. These are my opinions. But like, someone criticizing the excessive trauma in this book is not empathy deficient. And I find that the kind of fierce supporters of this book and of Yanagihara often dismiss concerns of over-the-top gratuitous trauma, the graphic depictions of it, as being ignorant to the fact that abuse like this happens in real life, which I find odd. I think pointing out excessive and gratuitous trauma shouldn't be viewed as dismissive of trauma as a whole, because it's not. But everything in this novel is excessive. Yanagihara said that she wanted everything turned up, but what results is an unrealistic plot that over-relies on extended, graphic, and repeated depictions of gross abuse and trauma in order to elicit empathy from the reader. And I'll admit, when I first finished the book, I thought I must have liked it because I had such a strong emotional reaction to it. Like so many others, I was weeping at the end. But then a little bit of time went by and I realized I was crying because that story was sad and depressing, but that doesn't mean it's actually good. And I think it's a bad book. I think it's really damaging, and I don't think that you should read it. I actually think that reading A Little Life is an act of self-harm in itself. That's not even a joke. Now, to round this video off, because I have been talking for an hour and 17 minutes and my voice is starting to go. Colleen Hoover. Colleen Hoover, the author whose books outsold the Bible in 2023. I don't know if that says more about the state of publishing or the state of Christianity in the world. I have read exactly one Colleen Hoover book in my life, and I hope I never have to read another. I read this book, Ugly Love. I spent 12 of my hard-earned euros on this book. I read this for a pilot episode of our Why You're Reading podcast that didn't end up getting released, so I have to put my trauma to good use. I have to pull a Hanya Yanagihara and exploit trauma, but this time it is my own. Before I read Colleen Hoover, I saw so much about her online, and I thought maybe a part of my dismissal of her was internalized misogyny. I was like, maybe I'm actually putting down these books that are, by a woman, widely read by women, without giving them a fair shot. And I thought going into it, maybe it would be a good trashy read. Maybe it would be a little guilty pleasure. I don't know. But the plot was boring. The characters insufferable. And the writing was terrible. I've tabbed and written all over my copy of this book. This page, I don't know if you can see, it says Jesus Christ on it. A lot of it is my frustration and disdain for this novel. And a lot of it is just me underlining problematic aspects of it or bad writing, of which there are many and a lot. Ugly book. Yeah. Ugly Love is a book famous for its big balls. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, stay tuned. This book is about a woman named... My brain is really starting to shut down. This book is about a woman named Tate who moves in with her older brother and then starts a friends with benefits relationship with her brother's friend / across the hall neighbor, Miles. The perspective flips between Tate and Miles, with Miles' perspective rooted a few years prior to the events in the novel, and it explores the trauma that made him swear off love. Unlike the other books I talked about, I am just gonna straight up spoil this book. I want to talk through the whole plot because nothing happens in it until the last 50 pages, and the plot is so ridiculous that it is a main feature of why I hated this book. So I need to talk about it. In Miles' storyline in the past, he falls in love immediately at first sight with a new girl in his school, Rachel, when they're both 16, 17. His dad marries her mom. So now he is living with his stepsister, who he's also in love with. They have sex when their parents are away, and she gets pregnant. Blah, 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 blah. She gives birth. On the way home from the hospital, Miles is driving Rachel and their newborn baby home, and he drives off a bridge and the baby dies. Tate's storyline is actually not about her at all. It is completely about her relationship with Miles. We don't know anything about Tate, besides the fact that she is a nurse. She likes orange juice. For some reason, this is a defining characteristic of her. And she has a dad and a brother who are both pilots. And I think she has brown hair and brown eyes. That's it. That is all the character development we get. She has no friends. We never see her in work. We don't know anything about her motivations or desires outside of Miles. She's literally just I can fix them. And then she doesn't, but they still end up in a relationship. There are also no female characters outside of mothers and love interests. And all of the characters are one-dimensional. Like Yanagihara, Maybe not to the same extent, but I don't just think Hoover's writing is bad. I think it is harmful. And at no point in the novel is it a healthy relationship. And this seems to be a recurring pattern in Colleen Hoover's books from what I've researched. And I have watched the It Ends With Us film for podcast research, not for fun. She never really seems to dive into like the power dynamics of play, the enabling of abuse, the role patriarchy and poverty so often play. And the problem with this book is how it normalizes the toxicity and like it frames Miles as a desirable love interest despite his horrible behavior. And the sex, okay, I was like, maybe people like this romance book for the sex. Is it good? Let's read it. The sex that they have first is unrealistic and like how mind-blowingly amazing it is. But then there are several scenes where boundaries of consent are crossed and the sex is painful and degrading for Tate, and it ends up leaving her feeling horrible. There's also a lot of like violence and anger issues with the male characters. They show very strong possessiveness over the women, whether it's, you know, Tate's brother or Miles, and like the gender role of like the woman being caring and nurturing and needing to just like endure the male's anger and pain. Like literally at one point, right after Miles tells Tate about his dead child, they immediately have sex. And Tate thinks, I let him use me to get rid of his pain. I'll do whatever he wants me to do as long as he stops hurting like he's hurting. There is no reflection or critical thinking on that sentiment. The quality of writing in this book, beyond the subject matter, is horrible. Like, I genuinely had headaches reading this book, which has not happened to me since I read Model Land by Tyra Banks, also for a YouTube video. And like for some reason, all of Miles's chapters switch to poetry after like a couple chapters, because he says like, oh, his love for Rachel turns his life into poetry. And so the chapters are formatted like quote unquote poetry, but it's not actually poetic. It's just a lot of line breaks. It's like, I hope she remembers the moment she became my everything. When Rachel's giving birth, it's, I get Rachel whatever she needs. Do you need ice? I get it for her. Do you want a cold rag? I get it for her. Do you want me to turn off the TV? I turn it off. Do you want another blanket, Rachel? You look cold. I don't get her a blanket. She's not cold. Do you want more ice? She doesn't want more ice. She wants me to shut up. I shut up. Give me your hand, Miles. I give it to her. I want it back. She's hurting it. I let her keep it anyway. That is how bad all of this writing is. It's so bad. And it's not even like so bad it's good. It's actually just horrendous. It's exhausting. The book went viral for this quote where Miles is driving Rachel and the baby home from the hospital. And it reads, "Thank you for this baby," she says from the back seat. "He's beautiful." I laugh. "You're responsible for the beautiful part, Rachel. The only thing he got from me was his balls." She laughs. She laughs hard. "Oh my God, I know," she says. "They're so big." We both laugh at our son's big balls. Within literally 2 pages, the son dies. Hilarious viral quote. Dead son. So why do I think Colleen Hoover's books are so popular? I think part of it is exactly what puts me off these books, which is the simplification of trauma. It seems like a lot of characters have one big thing that is wrong with them, and if they're able to overcome that single trauma, everything will be fine. And maybe that thought will be empowering or comforting to some readers. In this New York Times opinion piece, Pamela Paul writes, "In a country where economic inequalities can seem insurmountable and systems of power even more remote, this may be the best her hard knock heroines and readers can hope for. Hoover offers a fantasy that feels attainable. You too could achieve self-actualization. You too could realize an Oprah healing, no matter how much suffering it takes to get you there. For readers invested in characters who are like themselves, if perhaps more beautiful and with more exciting sex lives, the emotional payoff can still feel hard-earned. And just possibly, the story could happen to them." I think that's part of the appeal of Colleen Hoover. I mean, also her plots are very dramatic. There's sex in them. That's kind of all I can think of. I don't really know what the appeal of these books is because I find it so hard to wrap my head around these books. With all that, that is everything I think is wrong with what I deem to be the worst Booktok books, or the ones I've read. I hope you enjoyed this. It was fun to put together. I like talking about bad books. I like talking about media that I don't like, even if it really hurts my brain to read them. I think it's fun to talk about and hate on them. Sorry, maybe I am just a hater. And what's wrong with that? Also, I forgot to mention, if anyone is curious about the eyeshadow that I'm wearing, I always get questions about my eyeshadow. Here we are. It is this shade. It is the Kaja Bento Box Trio in Orange Blossom, and it is the middle shade. Voila. Anything else that I have to tell you guys? Oh, the next video is going to be a video essay on the kind of misrepresentation of teen moms in 2000s media, with a focus on the MTV reality shows 16 and Pregnant and Teen Mom, and how they kind of play into the teen pregnancy moral panic while actually skipping over key elements of teen pregnancy. I actually vlogged part of my research process in a video for my second channel, and I also talk about how I manage like ADHD while I work for home and work for myself, and that little vlog was quite fun. So if you need something to tide you over, you can check that out. I think the second channel is quite fun because, not that I don't show my personality here, but like it's easier to show your personality when you're talking about yourself, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, I feel slightly delirious. I've been talking for an hour and a half, and it is 11:15 at night. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to spend it with me. Again, things like likes and comments and subscribes help me out, but no pressure. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me on my second channel, or you can find me here. Teen pregnancy videos should be up within 2 weeks. In the meantime, let me know what you think of these books / other books by these authors / other Booktok books, or just, I don't know, tell me how your day is going. I want to know. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye. Special shout out to my patrons, Kelly T, Paula Boone, Eric Danielson, Cecilia Diarval, and my Sharpay Evans tier patrons.